very excited today to welcome our guest speaker, Kate Sanders from the Foundation of Nursing Studies, and then my colleague here, Jonathan Webster, who will do their introductions themselves in more detail, explaining who they are and what the webinar is going to be about today. So can I just remind you to use the chat in the sidebar here. So it's an icon that looks a bit like a question bubble along the top of your screens. Use the chat if you want to talk to each other and also raise any questions. And then my colleague Kim Manley will be using that chat bar to identify questions that we will pose to the presenters. So a reminder that the webinar is being recorded, so you don't have to come on camera, just use the chat and Kim will come on camera and present the questions. Plus, we will also make the webinar available either via our Impact website, which is on the UEA portal. And we are also going to provide the recordings, the videoed recordings on a YouTube channel. By the end of March, hopefully we'll have the whole series there up for you to go back to. And then Carrie will explain at the end of this webinar what our next series and what the forthcoming webinars for next month is going to be as well. So thank you for giving us your time. I completely recognise that there is so much work going out there in clinical practice at the moment. So thank you to all our professional carers and all the other key workers that are in our communities, keeping us going during COVID. Let's talk now about effective workplace cultures. So I will hand you over to Kate and Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Rebecca, please can we have slide 1?
And I've put the kettle on.
Okay. And just to reiterate, if people could perhaps please just turn microphones off, that would be great. Thank you. So good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction, Sally. I'd like to echo a very warm welcome to our third Impact webinar on creating workplace cultures where people can thrive and are good places to work. I'm Jonathan Webster. I'm Professor of Practice Development and Co-Director of the Impact Research Group at UEA. Kate Sanders, my co-presenter, will introduce herself in a moment. Kate and I have worked together on a number of programmes of practice development over the last, well, circa 20 years, most recently on the Teaching Care Homes programmes and the Guiding Lights for Effective Workplace Cultures, which is the focus of today, working with our colleague Sean Cardiff from Fontys University in the Netherlands and Kim Manley from the Impact Research Group at UEA. Kate will now introduce herself.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Jonathan. So, hello everybody. I'm Kate Sanders, and as Jonathan has already said, that I work for the Foundation of Nursing Studies as a practice development facilitator. I've been fortunate enough to work with colleagues at UEA over quite a number of years now, primarily through our work in the International Practice Development Collaborative, and it's been a labour of love, really, the work on effective workplace culture, because I think, Kim, it's probably started in early 2000s, so it's great to still be involved and this work to be progressing. I'm also co-editor of the International Practice Development Journal, and I'm also currently coming towards the final stages of my PhD, which is looking at the well-being of staff. So that's, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kate. So joining us today also on this webinar is Angie Titchen, who will share her reflections on the cultural journey taken from freedom to practice, the development of patient-centred nursing, and Karen Davis, who will share what the guiding lights for effective workplace cultures look like to her from her practice setting in dialogue with Kate. Thank you to our contributors and also colleagues at UEA who have made this webinar possible. And I have to sort of thank Heather and Rebecca, because sitting behind webinars are huge amounts of work. So thank you to the team for their support in enabling us to present today. So Sally has already made reference to this, but just before we start, we want to acknowledge how challenging the workplace is at the current time, and to thank everyone for your absolutely amazing work. In Gaelic, January is known as the Wolf Month, and this is so true at the moment. However, summer will arrive. Can I have slide 2, please, Rebecca? So our purpose in this webinar is to explore the importance of effective workplace cultures that are good places to work, drawing from our work with Sean Cardiff and Kim Manley. Our first publication in 2011 on effective workplace cultures, the attributes, enabling factors and consequences of a new concept, and more recently the guiding lights for effective workplace cultures that are good places to work, that was published in 2020. I should say that both papers are free to access from the International Practice Development Journal. This webinar series is linked to the Venus model of person-centered sustainable transformation, and we plan to explore the centrality of workplace cultures, drawing both from our own work and from the contemporary literature that underpins sustainable person-centered practice. Can I have next slide, please, Rebecca? The webinars have been developed around the 5 stems of the Venus model. Culture change forms one of the stems, in which culture is recognised as being extremely influential on social norms adopted, underpinned by values, beliefs and assumptions, therefore influencing whether transformation can be achieved. Culture change forms one of the key stems to enable person-centred sustainable transformation, along with practice development, facilitation, leadership and improvement and innovation. Next slide, please, Rebecca. I'd like to invite Dr. Angie Titchin to share the cultural journey from freedom to practice, the development of patient-centred nursing, which she co-authored with Alison Binney and was published in 1999. I have to admit that I have a very well-used copy of Freedom to Practice, and when it was published in 1999, I just moved from the equivalent of a Band 7 charge nurse post, and I can literally say that Angie and Alison's work liberated and freed my practice. So over to you, Angie.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and hello to everybody. I feel so privileged to be here today and to just introduce you extremely quickly to the cultural journey from freedom to practice. Alison Binney and I were involved in an action research study in the early 90s, and it was one of the first in-depth studies to develop what we called then patient-centered care, but in fact we were doing person-centered care as we understand it today. So through a 5-year systematic and qualitative action research project, which has some similarities actually with realistic evaluation, just for interest, Alan and I worked with nurses at the John Radcliffe Medical Unit in Oxford. And our key findings were that there were, as nurses moved from a task-focused nursing care to patient-centered nursing care, there were a series of parallel and intertwining and interrelated journeys. I'm going to very quickly show you the starting point and the outcomes of the cultural journey. So our starting, well, really our destination with this journey was shaping ward life. When before the project started, the nursing medical was very traditional. Some of you may remember the N system, and there was no guaranteed continuity of care to enable a therapeutic nursing, as it was professional nursing as it was described then. So our first destination was shaping life. The starting point, the cultural norms and values and behaviours and relationships in the ward were the traditional doing what you're told. So this stifled any creative thinking, any possibility of genuinely professional practice. The outcome that we wanted was, and we did this all with the nurses and with everybody involved. When I say we, I mean everybody involved, was a creative team, a team that was critical, creative, questioned practice, determined how the changes changes that were to be made and how they were to be made. And importantly, the person-centered strategies that we used to bring about this transformation was, and you'll recognize some of the words, increasing participation and democracy. So facilitating participation and encouraging experimentation. The next destination was learning how to work professionally. Starting point, getting through the work, mucking in, getting through the work. And the outcome that everybody wanted was a professional commitment to practice. And that meant a strategy of working in a person-centered facilitative way, developing a professional work ethos. Learning at work is the next destination, learning in and from practice. Starting point was missed opportunities for people with expertise, and particularly in our case, Alison as the senior sister in the 2 wards where we were working in particular. We were working towards the outcome of a lively, critical community. And for that, the person-centered strategy was promoting curiosity, openness and debate. And finally, caring for each other. There was a sociable team at the starting point, very friendly. The breaks were all about getting away from work and talking about something else to relieve anxiety and pressure and so on. And the outcome that we wanted was a genuinely caring team that looked out for each other, helped each other when others needed help in their teams, and genuinely caring, so learning how to give high challenge, high support, for example. And our strategy was creating a climate of concern and support. Now, although this study was conducted, we started in 1989 and finished it in 1995, the final write-up, and the book was published a few years later. I do feel that it is relevant to today. This study, along with others like Kim's, like Brenda McCormack's study, really helped to set the foundation for transformational practice development as we know it today. And it was all these studies and all this new understanding about creating an effective culture of effectiveness, person-centered culture, continued to be developed, as Kate says, through the IPDC and on beyond. And using person-centered learning strategies within practice, learning in and from practice. So I would contend that it is relevant today. The book itself, the Freedom to Practice book that Jonathan mentioned, the well-thumbed, was it was a bestseller. There were waiting lists at libraries for students to get hold of them. And I've spoken to senior strategic leaders recently, and they've said that they feel that it is still relevant today. So I would encourage you to, if you're a beginner, it's a wonderful introduction to a genuine person-centered practice and how to get there. So I hope I haven't gone on too long. Thank you.
Not at all, Angie. Thank you so much. And I would just endorse what Angie says, you know, so although the book is just over 20 years old, amazingly, it has such relevance to practice today, and the themes are so transferable around complexities of supporting practice change from a very sort of, at the time, articulated patient-centered perspective, but what we would probably describe now as from a person-centered perspective. But it does have huge amounts of relevance. So thank you, Angie, for giving us a flavour of your work and how important it's been in really sort of laying the foundations for work that sort of has followed on subsequently. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next slide, please, Rebecca. So in its simplest form, culture can be understood as how things are done around here. Our interest in workplace cultures stemmed from our assertion that workplace cultures represent the immediate culture impacting on both healthcare users and providers of care. Culture is not about individuals, but about the social context that influence the way people behave and the social norms that are accepted and expected. With staff shortages a global problem, which has been emphasised even more during the current pandemic, co-creation of effective workplace cultures that are good places to work is more important now, more than ever. Next slide, please, Rebecca. So in our work, and this is our work with Sean Cardiff and Kim Manley, Kate and myself in 2011, we concluded that by moving our gaze from organisational and corporate culture to the culture of the workplace was essential, because it is at this level that the patient and practitioner interface occurs. Whilst there is an interdependence between corporate, organisational and workplace culture, it is the workplace that is experienced by patients, users and staff. It is at this level, therefore, that the most potential exists for transformation that benefits all. Our understanding of workplace culture has grown and developed since the original paper in 2011. This has occurred from our own experiences of being part of and working with and alongside teams in grappling with the complexities of practice development and practice and transformation in the clinical workplace. At the same time, insight and theory has grown. We know that the shortage of healthcare workers stretches across many continents and that there is insufficient physicians and nurses to sustain care for an ageing population. We recognise the interplay of workplace culture and work-based satisfaction and retention, along with working environments, relationships and conditions. We were also aware that a number of high-profile reports had been published which identified failings in workplace culture. We also had a professional curiosity as to what's happened or what had happened since our first Effective Workplace Cultures publication in 2011. Through the lens of realist evaluation, we wanted to understand what works for whom, in which circumstances and why. Next slide, please. The study design was based on principles associated with practice development as defined by Brenda McCormack and colleagues in 2013, appreciative inquiry and realist evaluation. Appreciative inquiry aims to create new lenses for looking at old issues. It's a move away from traditional problem-solving approaches. The focus is more on stakeholder dialogue, identifying strengths and positives through proactive questioning so that desirables and what might be can emerge. These are considered more powerful generators of momentum and sustainable change. As we also wanted to develop theory of practice relevance, supporting healthcare workers, awareness of aspects of effective workplace cultures that they may otherwise miss, realist evaluation was used. Realist evaluation, with its generative principles, states that underlying mechanisms, when activated in certain contexts, will generate outcomes, often presented as a CMO formula. In essence, what works for whom, in which circumstances, and why. Next slide, please, Rebecca. In our overall design, we had 3 phases. Phase 1 focused on developing a website to foster engagement, a Twitter chat about effective workplace cultures that are also good places to work, and the generation of a tentative hypothesis and CMOs. Phase 2 involved presenting and refining our programme theories at an international conference, leading to the generation of 4 guiding lights. And Phase 3 involved a Twitter chat about the 4 guiding lights, which enabled further refinement. Next slide, please, Rebecca. And I'm now handing over to Kate.
Thank you, Jonathan and Angie. So I'm going to go on now to introduce the guiding lights to you and talk a little bit more in detail about them. And then, as Jonathan said at the start, I'm then going to share a conversation that I had with Karen Davis, who's a care home manager, to try and demonstrate what the guiding lights might look like in practice. So the findings from the research propose that there are 4 broad guiding lights that can be used to recognise effective workplace cultures that are good places to work. We acknowledge that the processes, structures and systems, etc., that make up the organisations that we work in are very complex, and this might put people off from trying to evaluate what their workplace culture is like. The guiding lights have therefore been developed to help with this process, helping us to understand what is working well and what could be improved, ultimately for the benefit of those receiving care and also those who are giving care. The guiding lights are flexible enough to be adapted across different health and social care settings, so they're not just health orientated, they have flexibility. The term guiding light comes from work undertaken by Kim Manley and Belinda Dewar in 2019, which focused on leadership. In this study, they used guiding lights as a metaphor for the term simple rules, which was used by Best et al. In 2012. The term rules perhaps gives the perception of something strict and more formulaic, whereas using guiding lights, we were hoping that this would encourage a more open and flexible approach and understanding. So we shared the guiding lights, the 4 guiding lights here. They focus on collective leadership, living shared values, safe, critical, creative learning environments, and change for good that makes a difference. And I think if you reflect back to what Angie was talking about, you can probably recognise all of those guiding lights within what she was saying, which kind of demonstrate the longevity of her work. You'll see that there's descriptors within each of these guiding lights. We've taken these from tweets from the second tweet chat, just to give you an idea about what we might be focusing on. But I'm now going to move on to talk about each of the guiding lights in more detail. Next slide, please. So the first guiding light. Each guiding light describes which contexts combined with which mechanisms results in which outcomes, the formulation from realistic evaluation. So in column 1 of the table, you will see the focus of the guiding light. In column 2, you have a combination of the context and the mechanisms. And then for each guiding light, there are a specific set of outcomes, which you can see in column 3. And these are called intermediate outcomes, because these combine together to raise a number of ultimate outcomes, which I will share with you later. The second column, as I've said, combines the context and the mechanisms. They are combined together in this, but we could refocus this and reread this in a different way. So, for example, this guiding light could read as, in workplaces or contexts that support and develop visible, authentic, credible and relational leadership by all, leaders are enabled to focus on role modelling values in action and co-worker health and well-being, as well as build on quick win improvements that contribute to sustainable change. And those are the mechanisms. Staff will feel understood, valued, respected and empowered to speak out and become leaders too. And there you see the intermediate outcomes. And a similar approach can be applied across all of the guiding lights. This specific guiding light emphasises the notion that everyone can be a leader of something, and that this is developed through collaboration and participation. Buurtzorg could be proposed as an example of how this works in practice, where teams are self-directing and self-organising. And Angie spoke about participation and democracy, which really resonates with the content here. Next slide, please. Although the guiding lights are presented in a numerical order, they're not necessarily intended to be used in a linear way. We recognise there is an interrelatedness between the guiding lights. This second guiding light emphasises a need for shared values to inform care and practice. And secondly, for these values to be lived, not just spoken about. In effective workplace cultures that are good places to work, people will be seen to do what they say they will do. Individuals, both persons receiving care and also interprofessional staff, will be encouraged to share what is important and what matters to them. So key questions that you might ask are, what is it like to work here? Or what values do you hold about care? Engaging in these kind of conversations can help to create shared goals and subsequently shared actions, which of course should be regularly reviewed. This process leads to the intermediate outcomes of staff feeling heard and valued as they shape the way things done. Or as Angie described it, they shape ward life. Also, having shared values that are role modelled by leaders will help us to realise the next two guiding lights. Next slide, please. When thinking about the guiding lines that have been presented so far, you might already be thinking about your own workplaces and the strengths that there might be, and also the possibilities for areas for development. So perhaps you could start to use the guiding lights to have conversations with your teams to gain their perspectives. What mechanisms have you started to recognise that you already have in place? Have you started to think that there might be some gaps? What evidence do you have to support some of the intermediate outcomes? For example, how do you know how your staff are feeling? This third guiding light focuses on the workplace as a place for learning in and from practice. In an effective workplace culture, the focus is on learning and not on blame. Key to this is a sense of safety, where people feel able to share their perspectives, to speak up, to question and explore, and are encouraged to be creative and to take risks. Safety isn't something that's a given. It's something that will be developed within a team over time and will be supported when shared values are lived. So, for example, there might be an espoused shared value that staff perspectives are welcome and valued. But for that to be lived, opportunities need to be created to explore these perspectives. And in practice, staff must feel confident that these perspectives ultimately won't be used against them. This guiding light encourages to think about the many ways in which we can use both formal and informal processes to learn about what we're doing well, how this could be, how we could do this more often, and what could and should be done in a different way. So you'll probably recognise that measurement is part of everyday practice for many of you. But how well do we use the information, firstly to celebrate success, but secondly to help us learn and improve? For example, what could we do with the audit process to make it a more effective learning opportunity? Who else could we involve in these processes? And how could we share the outcomes in a different way? Similarly, in the busyness of the day, what opportunities or moments can we create for informal learning opportunities? And how can we maximise these? So how well do we use huddles, for example? Or how can we structure corridor conversations differently to facilitate learning rather than to offer advice or instructions? Next slide, please. So we've already acknowledged that health and social care is complex, often creating uncertainty and challenge. And I think COVID has certainly accentuated this complexity. But what it's also demonstrated is that change is possible and even change at pace. This guiding light, however, is emphasising the importance of not making change for change's sake, but recognising the multiple drivers for change and taking time to consider these. Asking questions like, who decides what good looks like, and whose perspective should be prioritised? At the heart of this guiding light, which is intrinsically linked to the first three, is a workplace that foregrounds what matters to people, person-centred relationships, and ongoing learning and development. This guiding light suggests a bottom-up approach to change, whilst recognising the need for top-down support and also to work across systems. Next slide, please. So as discussed, each of the guiding lights have a specific set of intermediate outcomes, and these in combination give rise to a number of ultimate outcomes, which are on the slide here. These ultimate outcomes reflect the impact of effective workplace culture on staff health and well-being, and outcomes for those receiving care. And we know that there is a growing body of evidence that acknowledges the relationship between staff experiences and patient outcomes. So I'd now like to share a conversation to illustrate what the guiding lights might look like in practice. Thank you. Okay, so I'm really pleased to be talking to Karen Davies today. Thank you for contributing to this presentation around effective workplace cultures that are also good places to work. Karen is a manager in a large nursing home in Greater Manchester, and we've worked together for a number of years now. And I've always learned so much from Karen about the ways in which she works with her team to improve the lives of people living in the home. So Karen, thank you for being here. We've already had a conversation and we've been talking about the guiding lights, and we're going to talk through some examples to illustrate what these might look like in practice. So we're going to start with guiding light 2, which focuses on living shared values. So Karen, do you think you could give an example of a value that you believe is shared and lived by the team within the home?
Yeah, I think so. I think we can demonstrate that we share the value that we want to provide person-led care, and that we want to involve the people that we're caring for in all the decision making and choices that they have around living in a shared environment. One example would be we have a resident comes in and they don't want their room cleaning as often as we would like. They only want their room cleaning maybe once a week, so we have to match that with our requirements, statutory requirements, infection prevention and control. So we would involve that resident in that decision making. We would get the team to have conversations with them around what that looks like for them, what are the reasons that they don't want, what's their history around personal hygiene and cleaning, what's their habits, and we would write care plans and risk assessments around that. We would review that regularly, and we would get staff to be involved and relatives as well, maybe involved in those conversations and revisit that, so that we are providing care but meeting our statutory requirements as well.
Is that just the care team, or is it the wider staff within the home?
It would be the whole home, so it would be from the person that did the assessment, it would be the housekeeping team, the domestic team, laundry team. How often does that person want to have their room visited, and how would we facilitate that? So yeah, the housekeeping team would be actively involved in that process. Yeah,
so that's shared values right across the home.
Yeah, home approach.
So who has those kind of conversations with the residents and their families?
We all do. There's an expectation in the home that we've all got something to contribute, so there would be an expectation that we develop those relationships with those individuals and use those relationships to match the person's need.
Okay. So that sort of feels to me like it's leading into guiding light 1, which is about collective leadership. And so are you working with staff to help them develop the knowledge, the sort of skills and confidence to be able to have those kind of conversations?
Yeah, that's part of the conversation that we have on a daily basis. What does the individual want? So we would ask ask the question, is this person led? And if it is, or if it isn't, how can it be made person led? So what does the individual want? And everybody's got something to contribute that, because we've all got our ideas about what we like and what we want. So if we apply that to the individual we're caring for and with, then those decisions, the solutions are easy to find, really.
Yeah, thank you. So just thinking about guiding light 4 now, that's around change for good that makes a difference. And we were talking earlier about learning from things that perhaps don't always go well. Could you say a little bit more about an example from practice where you've learned and done something different from something that didn't go so well?
Yeah, we had a situation where we ended up in coroner's court, and when we debriefed from that, we asked the question about how would we got to that point, and this was an issue around an aspirate risk. We'd wrongly presumed that the person's loved one understood the risks as we did as clinicians, and we made the wrong assumption, and as a consequence she'd required that we gone to coroner, and that was a really good learning experience, because we hadn't informed her, we hadn't included her in the process. She absolutely didn't understand the risk for her loved one and the progression of the illness and the progression of the risk. As a consequence of that, we went back and worked a way of developed a system called SIF, choke infection and falls risk, that includes the individual if they have capacity, or their loved ones if not, and clinicians, so we all have open and honest conversations about what the potential risks are review that regularly, so there are no surprises.
So that provides a really useful example of change that is underpinned by practice and learning from that. But I presume that within that process, you had to do some soul searching and have some difficult conversations and difficult reflections, perhaps, which links into Guiding Light 3 and the importance of creating safe spaces to have those conversations and the opportunities. And how did you manage to do that, do you think?
I think there's a culture of open and honest conversation around what works and what doesn't, what didn't work, and how can we learn from that. So it's definitely not a blame culture. It's one of a learning experience, and people share, and everybody's got something that they can contribute. So it's having the developing vocabulary between staff teams about how to articulate what the solutions might be, and coming up with answers together. So there's an expectation that people will contribute to that process. I haven't got all the answers, none of us have, so collectively we do that.
So that, for me, feeds into some of the potential outcomes, particularly in relation to staff. So if you're taking a whole team approach, it sounds like staff feel able to talk out and share their ideas, and those ideas are listened to and valued.
Yeah, I think staff are valued. I think they know that they have something to contribute. We've all got life skills to bring to our workplace, and we are people looking after people. The people we care for they're just us in a different circumstance. So I think everybody has got something to contribute, and there is an expectation that people will contribute to that conversation, that they have got something to be heard. I am confident that staff have got a voice, and there are lots of forums we use to allow people to have a voice. Things like individual.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time, Karen, and sharing your expertise and experience. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I've got some questions that might be quite useful to share at this point, if that would work. What's coming through is a lot of reconnections for the past with
Sorry, Kim, I think we've lost you there. Can you repeat that, Kim, please? Kim, can you hear us? Are you there, Kim? Okay, I think we've lost Kim for a moment, so if we continue, and then we'll pick up the questions in a moment, hopefully when Kim is able to reconnect. So can we have the next slide, please, Rebecca? Okay, so thank you to Kate and Karen for sharing reflections on the guiding lights and what they look and fundamentally feel like in practice. It's really powerful, so thank you both. So what do we know? So in the current healthcare climate, it's important now more than ever to focus on workplace cultures that foster safe, effective and person-centered practices that positively impact on service users and staff. Next slide, please. So inspired by a tweet generated during the collaborative inquiry, a constant presence of the rule will anchor us in the storms. So the storms rages around me, I stay anchored. The turbulence tosses and throws me, I stay anchored. I taste the salt on my lips, I stay anchored. The wind bellows in my ears, I stay anchored. I'm pulled and thrown in different directions, I stay anchored. My senses are assailed, I stay anchored. Darkness fades and I see light. The calm after the storm has arrived. And next slide, please, Rebecca. And finally, to finish, summer will return. So thank you.
Okay, I'm really sorry. I think my internet broke off for a moment, so I failed to get over the questions that were being asked. Would that be okay if I share them now?
Please do, Kim.
Thank you. So what I was saying is lots of connections, lots of references have been provided in the chat by Carrie and Sally to help those find the resources. But one key theme that's come out in your questions have been around sort of like governance. So Lynn Wiggins, she asked the question when you were talking about the guiding lights, how do these concepts link to shared governance and shared decision making? And Rebecca, of course, gave a very nice example in the care home scenario where she talked about how the values were lived. But I get a sense from Lynn's question that she might have been a little bit more interested in some of the structures and process elements of shared decision making, which are needed to complement the living of the values and enable more formal organizational learning. And I'll check out in a moment how people see that. But a second question that was also linked to this was asked by R. Handel. I don't know your first name, I'm afraid, if you're a lady or man, but you asked if your question was appropriate. And of course it was really appropriate, because what you were asking was, where do you document the process of learning needs and the outcomes, which is very much again about the structures and processes needed to support shared decision making formally across organizations and systems. So that was the key bit that came through in terms of questions, and I'm not sure if anybody would like to say a little bit more about those things.
Shall I start off, Kate, and join in? Yeah, so I suppose from a shared governance and joint governance perspective, I think it's about ensuring that this work around effective workplace cultures actually is a theme that runs through all our governance structures, so around decision making. So it isn't just about it happens here, it's about how we reflect this across all our governance structures, and all our governance processes around decision making. So it isn't about guiding lights that sit in isolation. It's about guiding lights that are absolutely embedded in our joint governance structures, that are reflected at all levels across the organisation. But what do you think, Kate?
I see the guiding lights as a way of supporting the shared decision making and then ultimately the shared governance. Once a team is established, what they see as their shared purpose, shared vision, underpinned by the values, they can then agree goals and associated actions, and determine what they need to do to achieve them, and then think about what are the measurement processes that they already have in place that will help them determine how well they're doing towards achieving their goals, or what gaps there might be, and what other approaches that they perhaps need to evidence how well they're doing. The shared goals and purposes of teams can then be compared against those of the organisation. So this isn't just a team working in isolation. How does their vision for the delivery of care fit within the vision of the organisation, for example, and also the vision for care across systems. And so, as Jonathan says, you can then draw on the other things that are already established around you to help you plan what you're going to do, how you're going to prioritise it, and then also how you're going to evidence how well you're doing. And then again, you start the process again, looking at what's gone well, what you need to do more of, but then again, being able to identify what the gaps are and how you're going to address them.
Yeah, and I suppose I'm just thinking back to our work back in 2011. Sort of one of the conclusions we reached was, this work around effective workplace cultures is absolutely centred in the workplace, where the interface between practitioner and patient, service users occurs, but it doesn't happen in isolation. There absolutely needs to be that link to sort of organisational culture. As well, linked to leadership. And if we think about culture change with regards to the Venus model, which we referred to right at the very start, it does form one of those stems to support sort of transformation. Okay, so the other question is, where do you document? So again, I think this is intrinsically linked to shared governance and, sort of where documentation occurs as part of our shared governance model. So, sort of it is absolutely about, sort of good documentation and record keeping, and how we reflect that through decision making, so that we're able, if we were in a position of needing to sort of demonstrate where where information, how it was recorded, we could actually line, different places where documentation occurs that actually tells a story, I think. Kate, what do you think?
I think I would go back to the kind of the process that I outlined in terms of creating shared goals and action plans, and document your evidence against your actions to evidence whether or not they've been successful. And that can come in multiple forms. And as I say, you might be able to draw on some of the evidence from audit. You might be able to draw on some of the evidence from questionnaires that are already being undertaken within the trust, but it might also be that you engage with some staff and do some patient stories, and that provides you some evidence. It's thinking about how do you capture learning outcomes from clinical supervision, for example, and use those as a way of demonstrating how well you're doing. So I think it's there are multiple ways in which you document your learning and outcomes, and it's about creating something that works for you within your team, but that comes from your shared values, which then lead to your shared goals, and then that helps you develop your specific actions.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about the example Karen shared around discussions post, attendance at a coroner's court around aspiration, and actually where that would be documented in multiple places around sort of team discussion, how that's then reflected in the person's care plan or plan of care, how that forms an integral part. So you can actually start mapping out a whole picture of different places, but there is an absolute common theme that not only tells a story, but then actually directly impacts around assessment of need, clinical need, the prescribed plan of care, and then ongoing evaluation, which absolutely sort of gives a really sort of clear sequential sort of logical sort of story.
And that process was agreed with the multidisciplinary team. So that again shows the importance of thinking about who are you working with when you're delivering care, and how do you ensure the participation of everybody who's involved, so that the learning can be shared, and the outcomes can be shared, and the processes are known, are explicit.
Yeah, and so that there, fundamentally also is documentary evidence.
Yeah.
So evidence around if it needs to be called upon in relation to care, evidence that the regulator might sort of require as well. And it's about demonstrating the absolute robustness, I think, through joint governance, through governance processes of decision making, but the values that are really sort of driving that through practice. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, Kim, that have emerged?
Yes, a couple of comments building on the learning, how you might recognise that. I think it's really important to emphasise this link between the role of microsystems, that's our frontline teams, regardless of where they are across organisations, and the roles of enabling those microsystems as frontline teams. And that's the role of organisations and systems to make sure they've got in place the right governance systems for learning. A couple of comments about the importance of looking at learning cultures across the community and an equitable provision of care across all settings, which comes again to how our workplace frontline teams are supported by our organisations and our systems. And there was a question about how would you recognise the learning, and we've had some examples about that, but don't forget a vibrant, flourishing team where staff are valued and staff are proactive and adaptive will be the indicators of that. Helen Stanley suggested about using the WACAT tool, which is a formal tool you can use to measure culture change. And Charlie was wondering how to achieve equitable care across all areas. So a few points and a few comments and that have been made, and a couple of questions in that for you to ponder on if you would like to explore any of them.
Just thinking about the one about the relationship between microsystems and organisations. Whilst the guiding lights have been developed for the workplace, so the microsystem, I see that there is resonance with at an organisational level. So if an organisation wants teams to flourish at that workplace level, where in the place where care is being delivered and received, they need to feel that they have the support of their organisation. And so, you know, in the same way, they want to be able to make decisions and be collective leaders. Leaders in their own field, in their own place of work. So they need to feel that they have the support of the organisation to make those decisions. So they have a sense of autonomy and freedom to make those decisions. Similarly, thinking about shared values, if the organisation has a set of values, staff want to feel that those values are lived at an organisational level as well. And so those values need to be experienced by teams who are delivering care. Similarly, there's a lot being talked about clinical supervision at the moment, and that would fit in the creating spaces where people can learn. But there's a challenge in the delivery of clinical supervision. How do we enable staff to be freed up from the workplace? So in terms of the link between microsystems and organisations, what are the organisations doing on a practical level to enable that to happen? How do they enable staff to leave the workplace to attend clinical supervision? So that again is about living values. If an organisation says they value opportunities for staff to learn, how do they actually enable that in reality? So you can, I would say that there is a very distinct link. I
think, yeah, I was going to say, I think it's around lived values is really important. So we hear a lot about espoused values, but it's actually how we translate those values absolutely into practice, and how it is that we, you know, how we behave and what it is we do, because those lived values are absolutely sort of fundamental, because that's what's real. That's what's real between the interface between practitioner and patient and person. That's what's real about how we interface and work with each other through, you know, collective decision making, through shared governance, you know, through all those sort of key elements that sort of are core to the guiding lights. And how would you recognise learning? So how do we use our senses? You know, we sense, we see, we feel, and we have all probably had different experiences of going into different settings, and you do get, you know, there's clearly the governance bit which we've talked about, but it's absolutely about how we sense and see that translation of values into practice, which become tangible, I think.
Yeah, and drawing on Karen's example as well of something that didn't go well, you can see the learning there because things changed. So you can see the learning in the conversations that people are having about practice, about care. You know, is care something that's spoken about? Do you hear people having conversations about how things might be able to be done differently? What are the conversations in handovers and huddles and team meetings? Are they focusing on top-down instructions, or are they exploratory and thinking about what's really happening in that workplace and what could be different?
Yeah, absolutely. So Kim, is there any other burning question?
One very pertinent one by Marley Nugent is asking, is shared governance relevant to the patient or just the care team?
So if we think what good governance is, a key element of good governance is about keeping people safe. And I would argue that shared governance is absolutely integral to care. Because if it isn't, then it's a separate entity, and my view is that governance is absolutely central and relevant.
Yeah. The guiding light 3 includes safe in the definition, and that really is a holistic definition of safety. So when I was talking about it, I chose to talk more about psychological safety, but it's actually about safety in all aspects, and certainly thinking about COVID and some of the things on the news about nurses in ITU having to look after 4 patients. You know, there are concerns there about safety, and so yes, safety within the guiding lights is holistic, and it would absolutely involve everybody who's involved in care, so people receiving care and people who are giving care.
Yeah, thank you. So as we've got finally 2 minutes left, Rebecca, can we go to the last slide? Thank you, Kim, for posing the questions as Carrie leads the closure. Thank you.
I'd come on camera, hadn't I? A massive thank you to Jonathan and Kate and Angie and to Karen for that brilliant illustration of the effective workplace culture guiding lights applied to the care home context that I think people found particularly useful. And to our support team, as ever, Heather, Rebecca and Bianca, for all the background work that you've done, and to all our participants for joining in. It's been great to have you. Thank you for all the supportive comments. There's a lot there that we will take away. Just a signpost that our next webinar is on the 23rd of February, and in that myself and Sean Cardiff will be looking at the concept of person-centred leadership and exploring leadership in different contexts, both from a Netherlands perspective and a UK perspective. But we'll be looking through the lens of what that means at individual and team level, what it means for services and what it means for systems. And we're going to be linking that back obviously to workplace culture and facilitation and back to the Venus model, and doing some practical sessions with you all online for you to be able to explore your own approach to leadership and your strengths and areas that you may wish to develop. So Sean, I don't know if you're still on the call, if you want to come on camera and say a few words.
Do you really want to see me in this state?
Sure.
Just hear from you. Hi.
Hi, Sean.
Thank you, Kate and Jonathan and Kim, for representing our paper. Great work. I tried to contribute where possible, and I'm looking to working with Carrie on the next webinar. These are great ways to fill a lunch light, but at the same time interesting and a creative way of learning. And thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Carrie, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. The saying of 2020. Thanks ever so much, Sean, for coming on camera. Looking forward to working with you, and a massive thanks to the team again for the webinar today. It was brilliant. Just a quick round of applause to you all. Thank you. And we'll stay on camera and we'll just wait for everybody else to leave, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.